And the thing about this, this counterintelligence, intelligence, counterintelligence, all those kind of things. Back to education, like where better to best to put it is in textbooks, right? Like in these falsified narratives, either erasure, diminishing, or outright lies, right? Like there's an easy way for like, hey, you know what? Like we can prevent some of this by getting in front of this with 50 million students, ed prep programs and all those kind of things. I'm like, all right, how do we give misinformation? How do we just continue to make people more ignorant about what we're doing as a government, what we've done, right? And you see this, right? Like it's not just about like, oh, erasing black people. It's mainly erasing the crimes committed in this country, often done crimes committed against black, brown, indigenous, poor people, right?
It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free. We're going to fulfill our promise this week. We're going to talk about COINTELPRO again. But first, I thought, let's just check in, fellas, first. And I think the last couple of shows I've been jumping right in. I've been very TFA-ish about it, but, but just jumping right in, get started. But this week, maybe we should jump in and check in. I'll just say I'm in Houston, Texas right now. Downstairs from me right now, there is a room full of people that run schools and operate schools, many of whom look like me, and many of them, who have the same mission that I do. And when I have those situations, it reminds me of just how many people we have that are dedicating their whole lives to this, to doing the real work, not what I do, like talking about the real work. And it keeps me inspired. So I just want to tell y'all that, like, the folks who are actually got kids in their care every day are trying to build schools or trying to support schools or support teachers, support educators. That's the real work. And what I will say as my final word, philanthropy, y'all got to stop jacking these people around. These people are dedicating years and years and years of their life. And, you come in on a Tuesday and decide that you just don't want to fund something anymore where they've been put 4 or 5 years into something. So that's my soapbox this morning. But how are you brothers doing?
Yeah, doing all right, man. Doing all right. It's good to see y'all as always on this Freedom Friday. And you know what? Just got back from travel's crazy right now in the spring as usual. Spring and fall seems to be like the peaks of in the education spaces. But was at South by Southwest and saw so many of our colleagues and you know um, folks who are educators who are just like trying to really push and work, and had a real interesting panel about 70 years after Brown. What did we learn? What do we know? Where do we go next, kind of thing. And then also a colleague, Entre Hines, did a phenomenal job just sharing about Teacher Academy CT credits, in her workshop. And it was really great to see folks down in Austin. So, but yeah, I 100% agree with you about the like what investment actually looks like. If it took decades to create these barriers to equity, you can't fix that in 2 years. In one funding cycle. Like that doesn't make sense. Logically, systemically, or anything else. So 100%. Gonna put a crate next to your soapbox and stand on that as well.
So that's 2 on the soapbox. What's up, Ish? Good morning, brother.
Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, man. This week was a week. I gotta say, I always enjoy teaching Thursday nights in my the course I teach. That's like reinvigorating. Even though thinking about doing it for 3 hours beforehand is like the worst thing in the world. While you're actually doing it, it's lovely. So I'm still kind of going off the high of that last night, and ready to lock in this Friday, do the work, and focus the energy on what needs to be done.
Why do you dread the 3 hours? Because it's 3 hours like straight kind of thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, I love doing it
It
once
probably
I'm there.
flies by though, right? Like once
Yeah,
once you get started, yeah.
yeah. And I got this dope cohort too, man. We get into it. I mean,
Yeah,
like, I,
it sounds like a long time. Yeah, when I think about it, I don't think I've ever taught a 3 hour course.
yeah,
So yeah, that sounds long.
yeah.
Um, so before we jump in real quick, that reminds me of something. Can I share with y'all an inspirational story? Like
Please
something
do.
experienced for
We
this
need
week?
more of those. Yes, yes.
So I don't know if y'all
Please.
follow. Do y'all follow me on TikTok?
I don't have
You're on
No.
TikTok.
Okay.
TikTok?
Yeah, I'm on
No, I'm
TikTok.
just teasing. I know you're on
So I'm
TikTok.
on TikTok. So for people listening, I'm on TikTok at Citizen Stewart. Even if these two don't listen to me or watch me, um,
I get a clip every once in a while of stuff, but I usually see your stuff on Instagram.
Yeah, that's where I see it.
yeah, on
I don't.
Instagram I do more of my like repurposing other people's stuff, but TikTok allows me just to talk right into the camera. And
Mm,
last week I did a school visit, so I'm on this thing right now where I'm doing a project where I'm going to visit some schools that I think are doing dope things, and I'm going to
yeah.
document what they're doing, right? Because
Hmm.
I want the public to see stuff. I want them to see it. I don't want to like just have these kind of
Just talking
conversations.
about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I visited a school called, well, I'm not going to name this school yet because we're going to be putting out a piece on it. But I visited a school in St. Paul, Minnesota that's 22 years old. It has no principal. It's teacher powered. It's project based learning, student centered learning. And a lot of the kids there are kids that got squeezed out of other schools,
Mm,
and they are thriving. They are doing
mm.
amazing stuff. And like I'm not so in touch when I hear things like project based learning. It sounds like buzzwordy to me. When I hear things like teacher powered and stuff like that, that's stuff that people usually put on marketing materials.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
But this school is like one of those schools where you come to study it if you really about it, right? Like
Mm.
if you really do want to do
It's
project
like a
based learning.
demonstration school. You
Hmm.
come and you learn from them. Yeah.
And they don't expect that. They didn't expect to be that, but people just come. People call them up and come and do visits. So for half the day, the kids are. This is at the high school level. For half the day, the students, the young people, are taking a couple of core classes. But for the rest of the day, they spend on projects that help them get all of their state standards done. But it's a project of their own making. So it's a little bit like college, but you don't really have a teacher. You have an advisor who sticks with you for 4 years, all
Mm,
4 of those years. And that advisor takes the state standards and tries to help you articulate your project into that. Right.
hmm, hmm.
So it's not like you're just doing projects. It's not like just some wild, but the stuff that these young people are working on. The first person that I met, first student, she said, "I'm working on a project about mass hysteria." And I was like, "What? Do
Mm.
tell me. Let's go into this. Let's talk
Yeah.
more." And as they would talk me through their projects, it just started hitting me how much more interesting it is if you're studying something that you care about, but you're still getting the standards,
Hmm.
and how hard it is to do that for 30 different kids in a classroom.
Yes.
Like if you have a
Yes.
classroom, getting each individual one their thing is kind of hard. So watching the school master it, bro, I left in the middle of my interviewing people there. In the back of my mind, I said, I want to teach. I was like, I would totally teach here. Like this would be a place I could come and teach. And I said that to one of them, who's the person in the know there. She's the person who knows stuff and has been around a long time. And she's like, well, Minnesota has 4 tiers of licensure to become a teacher. I don't know if y'all know that. So tier one and tier two is like tier one is like community expert, and you could get a license on a 1 year basis. And then the other three, it gets increasingly more like, intense as you go up the tiers. But she's like, if that's something you wanted to do, and I hear this from you, Sharif, all the time, like, we'll make a way, like,
We'll
if there's
make a
something you
way.
do.
We need you.
But never have I wanted to do it like I did on
Right.
that day
Like
that I did the
that day
visit.
you felt particularly inspired and connected, right?
I saw myself in there. I was
Hmm.
like, I could be here every day. Like, this is something I could do every day. Seeing the spark in the young people's eyes, seeing them, knowing how bored I was in high school,
Yeah, that's what I was about to
how
ask you.
bored I
Like,
was.
what
So,
would if they had that when you were there? What's a project that you may have thought about or dove into? Like, what was like the peak of your interest? And don't say Prince. Like, tell me something else. Like,
no,
at
I
that,
mean,
like when you're like 16 to 18, like, what was the thing that you were like, oh, if I had back then, if I had a project that I could have done on X, what was X be?
well, first of all, let me say, don't just count out Prince like that, because music, because music would have definitely been a big
That would have been a part.
hook for
Okay.
me.
Okay.
And we did meet two students that were doing music based projects.
Mm.
Um, um, one of them learned how to produce, how to be a producer as one of the projects that
Nice,
I think
nice.
that he did. But one for me would have been like the topic that we have today. I'm sure that if I
Mm,
was able, I used to get my hand slapped by teachers um, because they would limit what we could do our papers on, or our
right.
essays on. And a few times, like I did one on Huey Newton. I remember this like so clearly. And the teacher told me ahead of time that I couldn't do it on Huey Newton, and I did it anyways, and I got an
Hmm.
F.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
couldn't believe that I put work into something and showed her how good it could be, and I still got an F.
Hmm.
Right. So if I was in a high school where you could do a project, today we're talking about COINTELPRO. I would have did a project on COINTELPRO.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I might be in y'all ranks. That was the whole story right there. I might be in your ranks at some point.
Listen, that
So
community, that what do you say, community certification? First of all, I need to look into that because I'm like, man, I need to share that with some Pennsylvania legislatures, because I saw something very similar in the school in Oakland. What's the name of school? Rose and Concrete.
in Oakland. Yeah.
Yeah, and they had community certified people who did a lot of I would say most of the expressive arts
Hmm.
courses were actually people from the community who had that expertise, and then they were able to come to the school and not just, hey, I'm coming for 30 minutes after school, and come if you want to. Like, no, they were the teacher, for that class, and for that credit and grade, which I think was just super super dope, and reminded me of Nathamu Sasa, right? Like, I'm sure everybody wasn't certified, but like there were people like they had expertise in things that they brought to the school, and just made us smarter, man. It made us a community. It was like the community had a school and they were part of it, not the school had a community and decide who's a part of it. So
I think if your state doesn't have that designation, they should look into it.
hmm
Because I mean, what it allows for is like if you want to teach African drumming and you have somebody in the community that's dope at it, they can teach for a full year in your
yeah,
school without having to go back and get 4 years of education to do it. So to your point that you just made, yes, it brings the community into your school, and it also allows you a pathway for your elders to teach and to be in the schools. So, and I
yeah,
feel like I'm becoming
and
an
not
elder
just a
right now.
guest.
So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, not just like a random guest, you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
we have Mama Maisha, she would come and teach about like Kwanzaa, but it was like as a guest and coming in and teach it. But suppose she was actually, she was already educated, retired, but like imagine if she's like, oh yeah, like 3 days a week she's teaching a course on, you know, black history, whatever angle.
Well, that's a good segue today because when you talk about the school that you attended so often, um, some of the people that we consider to be when we think about history, we think it's old and it's dead, and there's many people that are gone, but there are people alive right now who participated in some of the things that we would teach about, and they were the targets of some of the things that we would teach about, right? And some of the things that you even went through in Philly, like with your dad and others, right? That's still within our lifetime. So those people are still
Yeah.
alive, and those people could still be teaching. And our kids don't need textbooks all the time.
Hmm.
They can have other means. But we're talking about COINTELPRO today, and I think I wanted to make sure that we put out kind of like a short definition or a definition of what it is. So when we talk about COINTELPRO on this show, oftentimes we say the words COINTELPRO. Anytime something goes bad on the show, or like something glitches out, we say that's the government just doing the COINTELPRO. And I don't think everybody knows what that means. COINTELPRO is short for Counterintelligence Program. It was a series of covert and often illegal efforts by the government, and more specifically by the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigations. It included surveillance, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic political organizations. It was initiated in 1956 and officially ended in 1971. And I say officially ended with air quotes in 1971, but some of those activities might still be continuing today. And if you talk to the three of us, we would probably say it's probably continuing today. Who was the target of this? The targets were civil rights organizations, Black Power movements, communist and socialist organizations, the New Left movements, feminist groups, the American Indian movement, and the Puerto Rican independence groups. All were
Anti-war
targeted as
groups, which a
anti-war
lot
groups.
of
So
them, all of them probably, participate at some level and stuff. So yeah.
So that's kind of a general framing. What would you
That's a
all
lot of
say?
people.
So it is a lot of people.
Just like
And
get
so,
all of them, put
and
all
there's
of
a
them.
lot of people missing from that too.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Like this is how you get a Timothy McVeigh. You just keep looking at us and you're not paying attention to those folks, right? And by that I mean, the white supremacists who we have the FBI now for the last 10 years or more had information that white Aryan nation groups in the United States had a coordinated plan to infiltrate police departments, the military, and other authoritative bodies, right? And that it was a threat. It was actually a national threat. This is something that the government themselves studied, and they have all the information and data there. So, what's the most important thing, fellas, that we should teach to carry on to make sure no one forgets about COINTELPRO?
Yeah, I think for me, two parts always have has stood out for me. One, that there were citizens that exposed it. Right outside of Philadelphia. These you know the part of the lefties or whatever that you would that you just described who were part of the group. Ended up being professors at universities and things like that. But this small group, like, actually went and exposed it, didn't realize what they were getting, and then realized, like, whoa, this is a treasure trove of what the government does. And I think that's the second part. For me, is like, how much the government, while it's always, portrayed in one way, like, oh, this benign and supportive and bastion of democracy, both domestic and international, but they are really sinister. And if you'll do that to your own citizens, if you try to criminalize any voice that should be, standing up and holding you accountable, you become demonized and you become an enemy. You become criminalized. And particularly, for folks who are black and brown, and we see that nationally, we see that internationally is a common thread. So those would be like kind of two of the many lessons that you could really dive into about this.
And Ish, I want to kick it to you. I will say, just on your last part there, both of y'all are in Pennsylvania. So congratulations. It was Pennsylvania that figured it out
Listen, bro, listen.
and made it
I want
happen.
to tell you, Chris, like it always comes back to Philly area. You know what I mean? Like
Whatever.
that. It always comes back in some kind of way.
Uh, well, I just want to, on that point, let me just add a data point. The existence of COINTELPRO was exposed in 1971 when a group of activists broke into the FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania. Is that a
Yep,
place?
yep.
Media,
It's like,
Pennsylvania.
mm-hmm.
Uh, and they released the documents detailing the program's operations. So, I mean, how deep are you when you break into a FBI office and you release the documents to the world?
Well, the thing, and I'll just add one other thing, Ish. The third part that's probably about this is like, they never were caught. And even one of them says, like, you know what? If you're a white man in a suit, this is one of the guys who participated. He has a quote or something about, like, I'll try to find it and put it in the chat. Like, if you're a white man in a suit, you can get away with almost anything.
Mm,
That right there, that is a quote for folks to just dive into. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what does this mean? How does it apply today? Where do you see this? Where have you seen it? I would love to, go through that with students. When I told COINTELPRO, I didn't have that particular quote. We did talk about, like, they were all white and some kind of way broke into an FBI, and I applaud them. I like celebrate them, and they got away with that. How? You know what I mean? So
Yeah. I think to tell, like, what's really telling about that too is the fact that without them folks doing it, folks would have never known that that had happened
you
on
still be
that level.
gaslighted.
And so, like, that's for me, that's always been the major lesson. So when I always taught COINTELPRO, I would always, like, okay, these are the five goals, right? Make sure no rise of a black messiah, disrupt, discredit to the liberals, to cause disruption within the community, whatever. And then use real world examples of that, what that happened in action, right? Not only primary source documents, right, but also video clips talking about Fred Hampton, right, when they're talking about the Black Messiah piece. We're talking about, disruption of letters with the Black Panther coloring book, right, that the FBI mailed out to Black liberal families who were sympathetic to the Black Panthers, but not necessarily totally online, right? To discredit them. And so, like, these are like the lessons that I would emphasize to students so they know, basically, like Sharif was just saying, how this government rolls when it comes to these type of things. And it's been a consistent pattern, and we can learn so much about COINTELPRO because, like you were saying at the beginning, Chris, I think that John's still going, quite frankly. And we can just even look at the designation of so-called Black identity extremists that they used about a decade ago. I think, is it a decade? Listen, the pandemic got my head all, but they said it within at least the last decade. FBI had a whole designation called Black identity extremist. And I even remember going over that with my students about what does that mean. And of course, that's before some major incidents that we can point to, but there's also major incidents that happen right beforehand, which shows what you were also saying, Chris. The focus was somewhere else, and then a white supremacist incident happened. While they're like, oh, well, these Black identity extremists, want to tear down America and all this nonsense. Again, it goes back down to like this America's idea of the Negro problem that needs to be made sure to, kept in its place and not get too much out of line. And America has a long history of that. And COINTELPRO is just a growth of that.
Can you, can you guys talk a little bit about the specifics of what they did to disrupt groups?
Oh yeah, I mean that's one of the things that I would share with students. A prime example is they would write two letters. So imagine I'm the FBI. I'm writing a letter signing it Chris Stewart to Ish, and I'm writing another letter from Ish to you, and both inflammatory, accusatory, threatening, and really trying to sow discord, like really trying to make sure that you all have things against you. Another example is you had John Huggins and Butchie Carter, and who were killed by Maulana Karenga's group, us, what is it, us black
You,
people or us Africans?
yeah, United Slaves, I think it used to stand
Yeah,
for.
yeah.
Yeah.
And um and so that and the FBI was behind, like, oh, these two groups, let's get them to fight each other, right? Let's and so much of the propaganda and counterintelligence that they were spending so much time and money and effort to say, all right, how do we get these two to fight each other? And so and you have these, like, these provocateurs, right? Like we saw it in the when folks were protesting against George Floyd, and then you were seeing people who were, like, inflaming things, and then later finding, like, wait a minute, they're not even a part of this this group or whatever. Or if you're standing up for it, then they'll say, oh, you're part of the, what is it, Antifa or whatever. Like, oh, that's who you are. You're not really standing for police brutality. You want anarchy, right? Like, so just constantly getting people to, oh, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't align with them. Maybe we shouldn't talking about organize. Maybe we shouldn't organize with them because they're this way and that way, and labeling everybody communist at the height of the people being nervous about, oh, if you're communist, that means you're, like, all of these things were just examples. But I think that letter writing campaign was one of the most interesting ones to share with students, because you still have the documents, right? Like, all this stuff is saved, right? And you can share with them, here is a letter that they were writing, and just and and then you're believing that Ish sent this, and so you're starting to have distrust. He's believing that you're responding. Like, so just even that, just saying, like, hey, here's our tactic to make sure that they are not organized.
And that would be targeted too. So they would actually already infiltrate these groups and know where those divisions, if
Where
not
the pain
help,
points are.
and if not massage those divisions, right? And that's another thing that we need to keep, because like Fred Hampton's security guard, right, his personal bodyguard was what he wasn't FBI, but he was state police. He
Hmm.
was the police attached with the FBI spy. So like we need to recognize that, like, when we're talking about the scope and length of what the COINTEL program entailed, I mean, the whole church commission, right? That was the commission that looked at it, made rules for it to never, like, nothing like that ever happen again. And most of those rules have been rolled back, I believe,
Hmm.
when we're even talking about people's right to privacy and the application of the Fourth Amendment. So, like, when we're talking about the larger picture from COINTELPRO, I would say one thing we need to learn is that we didn't really learn anything. And number two, we also need to learn how they use the media,
Hmm.
selective news stories, how people are portrayed, right? How people are talked about. These are tactics that are still used today, probably mastered somewhat with COINTELPRO. Because
And
you think,
social and AI,
and
you
the
know,
AI and
talk
social
about
medias,
mastered.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can use all the images, but not be about that life.
So last week when we talked about this, I had mentioned a book, and I still can't remember the guy's name. I'm going to forget it, but it was specifically about the Dr. Martin Luther King files in COINTELPRO. And if you read through those, you guys want to talk a little bit about what they tried to do to Dr. King. And when I say they, people listening to this, when I say they, I am meaning the FBI, the federal government, and the folks who were enacting COINTELPRO. So as I say they, so when they were, what were they trying to do to Dr. King?
Well, I know one thing they did. They would send him letters. They knew that he would suffer some bouts of depression at times, and they would actually purposely, like, write those letters at the time, and then try to use something that they have against him in the letter, saying, "I'll expose you. You might as well kill yourself now." And they were just, and that's another example of how sophisticated, quite frankly, that program was, because they were aware of what folks' mental health was, and even trying to attack through that vulnerability speaks to something else. I could only imagine the level of, perfecting different tactics have become since. Another tactic that they used was to basically use other leaders against him. When King came out against the Vietnam War, there's no there's no there's no other better example of showing all these other newspapers and articles with, like, the head of the NAACP coming out, the head of the Urban League coming out against them, just saying you're doing damage to your cause, kind of repeating the mainstream line. Again, just another example of those type of tactics being used.
And they tapped his phone, didn't they? And when you mentioned infiltrator before, I feel like his photographer or somebody close to him was also an agent. Um, so he had to constantly have suspicion, also, right? So there was when he was reading these letters, and he was depressed at the time. I could see how it could be an effective tool because he was also paranoid. Not we use paranoid the wrong way sometimes. He was rightfully paranoid that anybody around him could be somebody who was working for the other team.
Yeah, and you need your people, you need your corner, you need your squad, and at the same time, now you're this seed of doubt and like, oh, I can't trust you, but in order to do this work, you have to actually trust people, right? In order to be as effective as at optimal levels, right? And so it's just this, this strain of like this like almost a virus of like what they want to infect the movement with, right? Where you're distrustful, you can't build community, you might not share everything, but what you didn't share might be what someone needs in order to, be effective in helping you and furthering the cause and organizing, galvanizing. Like all these things are just, and this stuff is like, when we think about like just the science that's used. So they say that so much of the like technology that we use is actually like space age, right? Like they use it in space, and then it helps society, right? Like a lot of these tactics are also used in other places, right? When you read like the research about like what the CIA did in Latin America, what they did in Asia, right? Like when you're talking about like this propaganda that they would use, in Iran. I remember Congress years ago they passed this bill, like the amount of money they were spending just to like send messages across airwaves and pump in porn and all these kind of things into a country. Like that's part of their destabilization tactic. Like they have a budget to pump in porn into another country, like, you know what I mean? Just because they know, like, oh, this is counter their culture. And
Wow.
so we're going to pass a budget just to flood their wave. It's like all this kind of like stuff that they do. They perfect it, but it's not just for outside the borders. It's for internal, uh confusion causing, chaos causing, mischief making at the worst levels. Like all of that continues.
That is so deep. Um, so we know that the CI, I don't know really the relationship between the CI and the FBI, but I take to heart what you just said around they all learn from each other and over time they become more sophisticated. So what they were using in 1968 was a vanguard leading edge technology then. So you have to ask yourself now, all these years later, I mean,
Today,
with I mean they
can't
probably
even
got
imagine.
yeah,
Yeah,
they probably got all kinds of
Talk about
analytical
phone
stuff.
tap.
So
Talk about phone tap.
worse than phone tap now.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
that's
now
what I'm
they probably
saying.
just. I mean, I heard about a weapon in Cuba that could be used to send a audio signal that makes people's ears split or something like that, drives people crazy or something like that. But sticking with this point for a little bit, because I do want to get to now. I think the place we want to get to is how this got us to now, and what might today's activists think about. But going back in time just a little bit, uh, well, let's just talk about it. This came up already. A couple of notable figures. So one of you mentioned Fred Hampton, and can we say a little bit more about the Fred Hampton kind of conspiracy situation that happened there? And it would be nice to talk about Malcolm to find out kind of like let's check in on that. Let's check in first on Fred Hampton. How does this apply to Fred?
Well, the thing with Fred Hampton was he was a Black Panther leader in Chicago. I think he was the chairman of the Black Panther Party at this
yeah.
point. He was only 21,
21.
a
Crazy.
rising star. They even point to the fact that he was head of the youth NAACP when he was younger. So you're talking about someone like rooted within the community, but like from a young child was like straight up organizing folks around issues of racial justice, right? So when the Black Panthers came around at the age that he was at, it was just a perfect timing, especially was kind of even though the Civil Rights Act was passed in '64, right, and the Voting Rights Act of '65 was passed at this point. Living in Chicago, what does that mean, right? And then coupled with Malcolm's assassination, which definitely pushed a lot of people to kind of go to the next level. But with all that said, though, Fred Hampton was targeted, spied on by the FBI and the state police of Illinois, targeted due to his role and his ability to organize people and kind of speak to not just Black folks, but unite them with white working class folks, unite them with Chicanos and Latino folks, also connect them with other types of movements, which made them very worried of what they called the Black Messiah at this point. And the thing folks need to recognize about Fred Hampton, this was after the assassination of Malcolm X in '65. This was after the assassination of Martin King in '68, right? Medgar Evers '63, But like he was after all that. So like you're talking about someone who's coming around when folks were looking for a leader, really galvanizing across race, across class, right? I remember I saw one documentary when the person's like he had the working class Black people and the bougie Black people, right? The church folk and all that, and that's the type of leadership that he provided. So his personal bodyguard was a spy, a criminal, right? And they do this in the movie Judas and the Black Messiah. But basically works along with the police to keep a track on him and gives them a key to the apartment and the layout of the apartment that he was staying at. And he was purposely targeted during 3 a.m. In the morning and shot like hundreds of bullet holes through the walls where in the room that he was sleeping in, uh, specifically next to his pregnant girlfriend at the time too. So like it's heavy like that. Yeah. Sharif, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think you hit on it. It's having bodyguard, having people in proximity, whether it's a photographer, the bodyguard, Malcolm X's, bodyguard was also, in a police officer, and this, great book, is The Judas Factor. Um, like, just gives a lot of detail about, like what was going on, in Malcolm's, camp, and how, they were, constantly attempting to, to undermine, to get information, and then, all right, how do we use this information against them? How do we try to stay a couple steps ahead? And, and often, that paranoia, awareness, whatever it is, like I remember, one part of his autobiography, Malcolm says, like, initially he was thinking it was like the Nation of Islam. He's like, but I know them. I know what they are capable of. They're not capable of this. I'm overseas, and these folks are here, and they're, so just that kind of awareness and just understanding, like, hey, and also, the other part he said is, like, they'll get one of us to kill us just to say it was one of us, right? And so that is a big part of, it's not just a disruption. They will murder you, and who they use to discredit you, who do they use to, give a counter narrative to you, and then who do they use to you know, stamp you out, or also, usually from our same, communities.
You know what's kind of telling about this when you think about it in the long term is there are many devices that have been put in place to keep us in place, to keep us like in shape, never like to overthrow. Going all the way back to before Nat Turner and whatever, there was always a fear that we might one day might rise up or flip the tables. And then there was always a sense of, okay, well, let's put some mechanisms in place to stop that from happening. So COINTELPRO is a good piece of terrorism because if it makes you distrust your people, make you distrust your friends, make you distrust your community, even when you're in the Black Panthers, even when you're in like neighborhood groups or whatever it might be, then you're a prisoner in your own mind. You're a prisoner of your own suspicion, and you have to be. It's smart to be because y'all just named like 5 people that were close to, I mean, your bodyguard. Really? Malcolm's bodyguard? Your photographer is one of them dudes? I think, Ish, I heard you say, well, I don't know what role he played with Fred Hampton, but I saw a dude like interviewed in the 80s it was on a documentary. And in the 80s,
Eyes,
he was
eyes on the prize. That's William O'Neill. That's the dude.
was that the
Uh,
dude?
Yeah,
yeah,
William
yeah.
O'Neill.
And
Yep.
right after that interview, supposedly, didn't he run out in traffic and kill himself?
Something happened to him. Well, first of all, I
We
don't
gotta
know. I
Google
don't
that.
know. But what I will say is, I was surprised that he was still alive telling the story when I saw him in the documentary. So I don't know how long he lived after that, but I think it was like the 80s or 90s when they interviewed him or someone long ago, and he was still alive. And I was like, See, the ones who live are the ones who got some sort of deal to do what they did or whatever. That's my own speculation on this. Did you find it, Ish? Were you googling it?
Yeah,
Did you
yes,
find
I
it? What's it
was.
say?
He definitely ran onto Eisenhower Expressway and killed himself.
I mean, that's the type of thing with COINTELPRO where you say, no, he didn't. No, he didn't. That's what the news said.
I mean, and the thing about this, this counterintelligence, intelligence, counterintelligence, all those kind of things. But back to education, like, where better to best to put it is in textbooks, right? Like, in, these falsified narratives, this, either erasure, diminishing, or outright lies, right? Like, there's an easy way for, like, hey, you know what? Like, yeah, we're doing this for the folks who have groups and things like that, but we can prevent some of this by getting in front of this with 50 million students, ed prep programs and all those kind of things. And, like, all right, how do we give misinformation? How do we just continue to, make people more ignorant about what we're doing as a government, what we've done, right? And you see this, right? Like, it's not just about, like, oh, erasing black people. It's mainly erasing the crimes committed in this country, often done crimes committed against black, brown, indigenous, poor people, right? Like, and so, like, what it's such a, a lot of times, and not a conspiracy theorist, and I am at the same time, because there is a conspiracy to do this. Like, it's not an individual. They
Yeah.
are collectively coming together to do these things. That's a conspiracy. So I'm not even a theorist. It's fact. You do the right to information, whatever that thing is, where you can get the information from them after a certain amount of years. It's right there. And it was a group of folks who were doing this. Department of Justice, it's the FBI, it's the state police, it's your local police, it's all of these people are conspiring to do something. So I don't want to hear about theory. What are the facts of the conspiracies that have happened and continue to happen?
I think I said earlier about like how you tie this to now. So I think it'd be great if you guys could talk a little bit about like even Ferguson. There were some weird things that happened after
Yeah.
Ferguson to activists. Just very weird,
And
just
we
very
brush it
bizarre.
off, we
So,
forget it. It's a little
hmm
blurb in a paper. It's just like, oh, coincidence. Oh,
hmm
coincidence. All of them, right? Like that many of them?
hmm
Coincidence? Really?
well, let me broaden the scope because I want y'all to talk about this. Talk about Ferguson and what seems suspicious there, and also talk about the fact because in the Black Lives Matter movement came out of that. And do you see signs within the Black Lives Matter movement that had all the same elements, like agent provocateurs, probably some sellouts, probably some people that were put in place to destabilize it or to lie about it, whatever. Just talk about the Black Lives Matter and Ferguson in terms of COINTELPRO. What looks like? What kind of looks similar to you?
Mm-hmm. Goodish.
Yeah. So first, I got to say for the Black Lives Matter movement, I definitely think there's all the things that you just described were at play. And even to the split that happened, about like half a year ago, where it totally split and just cut off people and be like, you're not getting any of these millions of dollars that are donated to us if you're a chapter that doesn't sign on to our new program, that we are the self designated leaders of this non hierarchical whatever. Um, so like I think all the things that you mentioned, whether it's greed, whether it's using folks off of each other, whether it's provocateurs, I think all those pieces were used not only internal structurally wise within organizations and localities, but also during protests. I think one of the things that folks always fail to overlook for some reason when it's like a consistent pattern in history is something called agent provocateurs in protest. And I've even seen people try to create violent situations unnecessarily at protests at times during the Black Lives Matter when it was at its height. And, so like those things are real. Now, when it comes to kind of speaking on how that is used in like the individual sense in the modern day, I think it gets a little bit more scarier in the sense of I don't think that there is any way that you cannot not be looked at closely if you want to be looked at closely, if you know what
hmm
I mean.
hmm And a point that you just made about agent provocateurs. What I know about the people in Minneapolis that were organizing the protest against police violence in Minneapolis. First of all, they weren't new at it. Second of all, this wasn't George Floyd wasn't the first. He was like the 12th, 15th over time, and they had protested every one of them. And the whole Philando Castile and others kind of blew up and got some national attention. But there's many that people don't know this was pent up over time. So it was an honest protest. These were honest protests. And now Fox News and a lot of people like to, well, they were burning their cities down and all this. What they conveniently forget is that it has been shown, first of all, the white supremacists drove to Minneapolis from across the country, many of them from Texas. One of them shot AK rounds into the police department and was arrested for it. But before they arrested him, that was like supposed to be about the violence of Black Lives Matter, right? The dude who set the thing on fire, right? Turns out it was a visiting white supremacist coming to infiltrate the Black Lives Matter movement and make it look violent, right? The third one, the one who was breaking the windows of AutoZone and others, caught on social media, a cop, okay? A straight up cop, right? So in all these, the violent parts of these protests were infiltrators, but people rarely tell that story. They tell the story of Black Lives Matter being violent and all of that. The thing I think stands out for me and has always stood out in Ferguson, in Black Lives Matter, in the civil rights movement, in everyone, I look for the people who are trying to cause discord and make people fight. I look for the people who are the ones who stand up and be like, well, I'm not with you, or whatever. And that's my first signal. That's like my smoke signal. Oh, this looks a little interesting. The ones that are against us organizing well or unifying well. And I see a lot of that now with social media. It has put it on steroids. The ability to put agent provocateurs into anything, an election, into whatever. Now it's automated. I mean, now you can just like, and I think the GOP. I'm sorry, y'all who are GOP, but I think you got yourself a whole bunch of them that look like us that are really just doing devious things. But anyways, Free, I feel like I went on there. Just help me out, brother.
No, yeah.
So
No, you're right. I mean, it also made me think when you talk about like, these provocateurs who put in there after 9/11, they were bombarding Muslim youth with this kind of stuff. Showing up to masjids, trying to, entrap, ensnare, upset, angry, emotional, maybe, youth who didn't have necessarily, some additional support in their ears or whatever. Like they were doing this, it was a group who was paintballing and ended up, oh, you're training for, for this or that, right? Like if we saw that, we used to really caution youth, like, hey, these folks, like if they're trying to get you to do something, they're probably, not probably, they are your enemy. Be aware and make sure you let us know. Because we were seeing this around the country. And it was basically entrapment and legalized entrapment, so technically you're not supposed to do this as law enforcement, right? Like they were doing it like nonstop, and some of the same tactics. That's how I know it continues. They continue to do these do these things. So yeah.
what do you
No,
think?
absolutely.
You two, as educators, what do you teach young people about this that doesn't make them overly suspicious, but doesn't let them be overly naive? Like, what's the
Yeah.
middle part?
Yeah, I think the middle part is just making sure, and it's hard, because as soon as you see this stuff, it's like, you can't
Unsee
erase it. Yeah, you can't
it.
unsee it. But I think, for me, it's always been about, also showing where trust is being built, where reliability, community can be counted on, right? And so it's like it's on this continuum and not just showing the things that would just make someone depressed and unable to get out of it and just reject everything, all help and all these kind of things. But really, just trying to like help show like there's in humanity, you have a whole range of people, you have a whole range of issues, you have a whole range of things, and that love and trust and organizing community also exist in the midst of all of this. Joy, love, trust also exist, right? And I think it's really important to paint that broader picture. Um, you know, but yeah, it's you also can't let your guard down, and just remind them like you cannot let your guard down. They were constantly looking for, and they do this full time. Like this is their full time job to no matter what it is, to distract you, to make sure that you're unorganized as a people, as a community, make sure you're ill informed. So like it's we talked, I think, a couple weeks ago about just being vigilant as parents. This is what it reminds me, really, helping students, like how do you be vigilant and healthy at the same time, right? Not an easy thing to strike, but that is the goal. How do you be vigilant and loving and healthy, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, all those kind of things, obviously physically, simultaneously, right? And part of you being healthy is a form of being vigilant. You're not at your best if you're exhausted. You're not at your best if you're, just unhealthy, if you're dehydrated, if you're sick, right? And so part of being vigilant is being healthy, right?
My man said, "Drink water."
Hey, listen.
The revolution will be hydrated.
We'll be hydrated, literate and hydrated. You know what I
Literally and
mean?
hydrated. What about you, Ish? When
Listen, I
you think
remember
about,
one
okay,
other thing. I
just
remember in Asada's book, she talked about how she when she I think she and this it's been a while, but I think she talked about like when she stopped smoking weed or when she had talking to this revolutionary about not smoking weed because she was just like, yo, you got to be clear headed. You got to be able to like see what's coming and where you lead, right? You got to be able to see clearly, right? And that struck me as a youth reading. I was like, oh, because another form is like, yo, when you're revolutionary, so the bud's all right. You know what I mean? That's part of the culture, right? Like the counterculture is little bud. So it was like interesting to read that so clearly, from a side. And I forget the exact context, but that just has stuck with me over the decades.
let me just quickly riff on that, and I'll come to you, Ish. But quickly riff on that
Chris
to
about to
say,
disagree. Like, no, listen, yeah.
no, no, like this is the paranoid part, right?
hmm
When
hmm
you think about the food supply in the United States and what we're putting in our
hmm
bodies and what it
Yes.
does to us, and when you think about life expectancy and all those different things, and then you think about the cultural aspect of food, it becomes culturally like appropriate for you group to start eating the slave diet, the things that are going to kill you earlier, but you enjoy it because it's just part of your life and it's
hmm
good, it tastes
hmm
good or whatever. But it's a weapon, it's poison. And then you think about like Jackson and Flint and others that had so much lead in their water that they had 300% increase in special education in their children and whatnot. And you have to ask yourself things like, well, you think that's an accident? Like
hmm
where did the lead show up in the water? Like in what places? In Beverly Hills?
hmm
Because last time I checked, Beverly Hills didn't have any lead in their water, but everybody else seemed to get lead in their water. So the food supply, it's cheaper to get like Kool-Aid than a salad, or water or whatever. Like, you go to
Yeah.
some of the vending machines, and this, I know I sound like an old man, but the water is the same goddamn price as the Coke, right? And you have to think, well, wait a second. Now, water's an
Water's water.
ingredient
Like,
of the Coke, right? But it's incentivizing you to kill yourself and through food and what you ingest. And when you just said the weed thing, um, like the weed supply has changed in the United States. So people who were smoking weed in the 70s got no kind of grip on what people are smoking today, right? Like I say, it just
that's total.
these
Yeah.
things change like over time because they can grab a hold of any system that of stuff that you ingest. Now I know a lot of people listen to this. You are not going to give up your pork and your fat and your bacon and all that type of stuff and your weed and whatever and your 15 different medications that you're getting from big pharma or whatnot. I know. I'm just saying maybe we should consider that we've been programmed to be where we are right now. And real freedom, as you just said, I laughed about it when you said hydrated, like we need to be hydrated. But kind of that's a good start down the path of we might end up being hydrated vegans who are completely sober, right? Anyways, Ish, I didn't mean to take a left turn on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I should specifically address right
Oh
there.
yeah, yeah. Well, we was asking before about like what's the middle ground that we should teach young people so that they don't become
Yeah.
naive, but they also don't become overly suspicious.
Yeah, I mean, like Sharif, I mean, hit that out the park. Like all those pieces are definitely involved in what and how how students should be taught about it. I think also they should be taught about it, and this is the social studies teacher in me, right, through a historical lens also. So like you can look at these declassified primary documents, have the conversations about what does it mean for something to be declassified. Basically, learning transfer skills that aren't just confined to this specific looking at this specific primary source, but many governmental document primary sources. And then even have conversations about its implication about today, where it's like, don't, it's not walk around paranoid like they're after you. You might as well give that up. I already pointed the fact out that you have something like that in your pocket, right? It's much more of like, how are you operating? Are you operating within this world in the sense of doing it for the right cause, for the right reason, right? And Not saying that that has been that effective an explanation as Sharif says, because there is that fear still of ending up like a Fred Hampton after students learn about Fred Hampton, right? Uh, like wondering why there hasn't really been any leadership that folks can like point to really since that time period. Uh, Even though that is an overemphasis on individuals, there's still that kind of like gap of kind of like movement leadership happening on a national scale, at least the perception of it. And so, like, I think all those factors contribute to a sense of paranoia and be like, yeah, this is America. You're black. You should be paranoid.
Mm.
Um, and
Damn, that's
what,
a T-shirt. I'm gonna put that on a T-shirt.
what it's
Wow.
it's a riff off of James Baldwin.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
part of staying woke, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a part of staying woke.
You know what? That's so deep because stay woke. That was the original meaning, and it's still the meaning for those of us that haven't believed the hype. Have bought in. Here's my final word that I'll say on all of this, and I'll get a final word from you two also. My final word on this is that we live in a bit of an afterlife of La La Land. We feel like many of the things are over that we talk about and that we study, that they ended at some point in time. So all these shows that we do that are about history or whatnot, it feels as though people are just drinking and having a good time today because it feels like we're in the afterlife. And you're still living in a virtual simulation, just so you know. You're living in a mental slavery virtual simulation now. And to break out of that requires you to be constantly vigilant about seeing deep truths about the world that you live in. And this doesn't just affect us. When I think about things like PG&E and, the Aaron Brockovich story was about PGE poisoning a bunch of people or whatnot, and they just trusted their basic utility that they had, and they trusted it all the way to cancer, to death, because they were, sucking. And you think about something like that, and you compound it. How many different places is that happening in our life? I said the thing about the lead in the water, the connection to special education in schools. Just keep going down the list. We could talk about private prisons. We could talk about how the music industry is profiting off of sending people into prison, specifically us. So I don't think you have to be paranoid. I think what you have to do is get out of La La Land though, and believe that you do have to stay woke. You do have to be constantly vigilant. You do have to be an intelligent being. Malcolm used to talk all the time about being intelligent. And I think we're an intelligent people. I just don't think we always deploy our intelligence. And I think the reason for that is many of our revolutionaries have been hired by the nonprofit industrial complex. Many of our deepest speakers are afraid to speak because of Malcolm and Martin and others. The example that the United States has given you, which is if you speak the wrong thing too much, the violence will come for you and your family. We can even get into like Malcolm. They killed Malcolm once, but they killed Malcolm like 5 times because I think there's some funny stuff that happened in his family after that, right? I don't believe any of the stories.
Martin too.
Martin too, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my final word. Get out of La La Land. Stop thinking you're in stop being in the virtual simulation and get into the real world. It doesn't mean you have to be depressed every day. It just means you have to be alert.
Yeah, that part. I think the alertness and aware and informed, right? Like, and it always, for so many of our conversations, goes back to the Matrix where the boy's like, "Yo, I don't want to know," because you hear that like, "Yo, I don't want to know. Let me self medicate. Let me be entertained. I don't want to. Let me just go through the motions until my time is called, right?" And so, like, that's a real thing, like where people would rather be sedated, and I don't, not for judgment, like I understand like just the weightiness and the of like all of the things that are up against, right? And the collusion that happens between big pharma, industry, like the science and technology, like the government, like all of these things, like I mean when you just sit back and think about it, like humanity is at kind of at not kind of humanity is at war with the structures that are in power. Like that is a constant thing, like the amount of times if you're talking about like sharing students with history, if you just go through what have they done, what have they denied, then what do they say? Oh yeah, we did that. What did they do, what did they deny, and then later on say, oh yeah, we did that. whether it's dumping, whether it's pesticides, whether it's DDT, or I remember as a kid, I'm reading about DDT and Ranger Rick and Highlight magazine, right? I'm just reading. I'm like, this is crazy. Like this is, like this is absolutely nut. The poison that they're pumping into society, like this, like you're supposed to care and take care of and improve the lives. And the one thing they will improve, they may make you sick as hell and keep you alive just to keep you here. Right? Everybody's about like, oh, 100 years old. Oh, we can get to 150. What is the point if you're like deathly ill the entire time or a zombie the entire? What's the point? So the whole pursuit of happiness is a really interesting thing here in this country. It's in there, the statement officially that you have that right. But do you really?
Yeah, you never did really. I mean, that was marketing, right? That was a great marketing job. And the pursuit of happiness, on plantations. So Ish, what's your final word on COINTELPRO?
Yeah, I would say that, COINTELPRO is still alive. Um, that we have to make sure there's no reason any of our children graduate from high school or go to college not knowing about any of this, like so many of us didn't. Sharif, you lived through it basically a lot with COINTELPRO, but most folks have no idea the full extent, the full disruption that produced, and that the full disruption that it is. And the way I always look at it is like after King and all them, they're like, yeah, that's not going to happen again. We need to make sure that this does not happen again. We need to keep a line. We need this domestic internal threat not to be a threat ever again. And I think that's still a reality. And I think that there's different tools and different things still being used in different ways to make sure. And agent provocateurs are still real. So that's the lesson. That's what I take from this whole conversation. Is like we need to learn what happened then, and then probably times the capabilities of the folks who did that with the mind state that existed back then, which probably still exists today. And then that's probably what it looks like today. So,
I appreciate that. I appreciate you, brothers. When I say the revolution will be literate, that's why I love these conversations so much. It's also because what you just ended on, Ish. I feel like I can't tell people what to think. I can't tell them what to learn. I can't tell them what to look out for. What I can just say is we should all be learning in secret. Just be learning people constantly. Just be reading all the stuff we talked about or whatnot. And don't be splashy about it. Just kind of, and if we could get 30 million black people doing that, I'm faithful that I don't have to have the answer. That is my answer. My answer is the revolution will be literate, and I can't tell you anything more than that because they'd kill me for it. So let's just go learn in secret. Let's just go learn in private and act accordingly after you learn. This has been Freedom Friday, another Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you are freer after this hour with Ish, Sharif, and me. We appreciate you for listening. Join us next week with another riveting discussion that continues our learning series, which means when I say series, it's a never ending series. This is our life. This is what we do. So we appreciate y'all for listening. Share the show. We'll see you next week.